As a sociologist, one of the topics that I research is tourism, and specifically I have a critical perspective on the tourism industry, and my particular subject matter was digital nomads. And so I wrote a book and many articles about the lifestyle phenomenon of digital nomads. And so now I'm getting more of a chance to kind of experience the digital nomad lifestyle by traveling through Southeast Asia for about 3 or 4 months and really getting that kind of feel of the places that they go to, as well as just the lifestyle of trying to balance work and leisure, travel, sightseeing, and so on. I recently wrote 2 articles for academic journals on the perspective of critical tourism studies and on the topic of digital nomads again. And so one of the things I was focusing in one of those articles was on concepts such as over-tourism, mass tourism, niche tourism, sustainability in tourism, and ultimately degrowth of the tourism industry. And so these are concepts that are pretty common and popular in the academic literature of tourism studies. And so the concept of over-tourism is just that too many people might descend upon one location, and that location just cannot handle the volume of travelers into that area. It has negative impacts on resource usage, especially when considering the tourist population compared and contrasted against the local population, which always consumes less resources than are allotted to the tourists. For example, tourists in resort hotels might consume just a lot more of the clean water in the region and stuff like that. However, in the concept of over-tourism, there's just an imbalance because a lot of tourists go to some places, but other places get less tourists than they actually want. And so the concept of over-tourism is one of imbalance, that tourists are not just spread out equally among all the locations that they could travel. I also like the idea of niche tourism because it's targeting a particular demographic or interest in tourism locations. And so, for example, niche tourism would include digital nomads who are long-term tourists who are looking to stay in places for extended periods. But niche tourists could also be like heredity tourism, which I'm really interested in. For example, folks like me who are Asian American traveling to Asia and trying to connect with their heritage backgrounds. You also have tourists that are interested in specific topics of interest, such as disaster tourism or dark tourism, folks that are interested in going to places that have experienced a historic disaster. My father, for example, was really into World War II tourism. That took him several times to the Philippines. So people might have a particular interest. And one of the things that I covered in this article was movie tourism. So movies filmed in a particular location really drive traffic and tourist interest to that location so that they can go to that place and take their picture in that place where their favorite movie star was, or that place where their favorite movie scene was filmed. And a big concept in the field of tourism studies is sustainability. Just how can tourism practices be more friendly to the environment and use less resources? And so this can also and often result in what we call greenwashing marketing, which is using these concepts of sustainability. For example, if you go to a hotel and they say, put this card on your bed and we won't change your sheets or your towels as frequently in order to reduce water usage. Those are more like marketing gimmicks than actual reduction of consumption practices, because ultimately the tourism industry cannot advocate for a reduction in its own consumption possibilities, because that by definition is going to reduce their own business interests. So the tourism industry as a whole is always promoting its own business interests. And finally, in the article I just wrote, I concluded with the concept of degrowth, because ultimately if you look at the charts of tourism, it just goes up, up, up exponentially. If you think about how things have grown in the tourism industry since interstate highways were developed in the United States, from 100 years ago, from 50 years ago, from the post-war boom and all the development that has occurred since then, and most especially the advent of cheap and affordable flights, which allows a lot more people to to travel to any place in the globe. And we have to think about the jet fuel and just the resources consumed by air travel alone is really significant and incredibly damaging to the earth. And so when you start to really understand the consumption practices, the growth of the tourism industry and how harmful it is to the environment, then ultimately you see that the industry eventually has to retract, and it will either be forced to because of lack of resources, or by choice it can choose to reduce its impact on the environment and the local area. And so ultimately, degrowth will just have to happen because we live on a finite planet and finite resources exist. And so there's also this concept of overreach, in which you're just using more resources and producing more pollutions into the environment that the earth can reabsorb on its own. And so there's a lot of these greenwashing ideas such as carbon capture that sound good, but actually things like that don't even exist yet. And so that is really a fantasy, an illusion, and it's also disconnected from the actual thing causing the environmental problems. And then you're going to say, well, we're going to capture the carbon that we're putting out into the earth, which is absolutely impossible, because the infrastructure that would be needed to produce that outcome would itself be an incredibly polluting endeavor. So these sustainability ideas are just not realistic, and really we need to think about degrowth. And so as tourists ourselves, as travelers, we just need to be a lot more critically reflexive on ourselves and our own practices, and what can we do to reduce our impact on the environment, the negative social consequences in those locations, and so on. And so these are the kinds of concepts that are at the forefront of my mind as a sociologist when I'm traveling, when I'm thinking about and writing about traveling, when I'm interviewing people. And so that's the kind of content that I would like to introduce to YouTube, introduce to the video traveling content, which just overwhelmingly focuses on, what you can consume. What are the top 20 places or adventures you can have in this particular city? And so really we need to start thinking about how we can be a lot more responsible as citizens of our own country and as guests in the locations that we travel to. And so those are the thoughts that, I'm always thinking about. And of course, I'm not saying that I'm above it all, I'm an American, I'm a consumer, I'm having an impact on the earth just like everyone else in my position. And so I'm not saying that I'm free of those problems as well, but just that I'm aware of it and I'm thinking about it, and I'm upset by these issues, obviously, and this is, the life of a sociologist and what we think about. But I would really be interested to hear from folks about, how they see their tourism and travel impacting local environments, and what kind of critical thinking skill do you have in your own travel practices. So yeah, those are just, a lot of the thought that I'm having here as I travel in the Southeast Asia region currently, and would love to hear from folks who've also traveled to Southeast Asia and what your experiences and perspectives were.